We're going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to our USBE Finance Committee on this Wednesday evening. It's a little different than the usual. We want to welcome everyone that's here. We have enough to get started and take action. Board Member Wright must be on his way. He was planning on coming. So I want to thank board members for being, and committee members for being here so we can get started. I know that we have quite a bit to get done. We want to get right through this agenda, and I'm sure we've got plenty of questions. Yes.
Board Member Wright said he was going to call in because he's in traffic. That was his email. So do we have a call?
Joel Wright has joined.
There we go.
Hey, there you are. Okay, you're in. Okay, we're going to get started. Has everyone got their computers up and going? There's been a few snags. My agenda is coming up. The first item for the Finance Committee meeting is under 1.1 risk premium. Is this a typo? Does that say increase or is it supposed to say decrease?
Increase.
Oh, increase. Okay. Risk premium increase to LEAs. I knew that. I was just trying to be goofy. Scott, do you want to take the point?
Sure.
Should we bring?
Well, if you'd invite Brian Nielsen up from Risk Management. And Brian, will you introduce yourself? And
We have a mic here. Welcome, Brian. It was good seeing you down almost into Arizona. Weren't we a few miles away from Arizona last night? Right. So I'm glad you traveled well. We'll turn the time over to you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Brian Nelson. I am the Division Director for the Utah Division of Risk Management, also the State Risk Manager. And I believe we have forwarded to all of you a presentation that I will happily go through and explain and then answer questions. This presentation was the same one given to the Rate Committee that basically passes upon rates and forwards recommendations to the governor's office, and also to the IGG committee, that's the Infrastructure and General Government Committee, that looks at rates for the ISF's internal service funds, of which risk management is one. So I will get to that. So just moving to slide 2 of this presentation, this is just some information. I'm going to move through this quickly, but we are a risk fund. We insure a number of entities, including the colleges, universities, all of the school districts, all state agencies, and about half of the state's charter schools. Rates can change. Moving on to the next slide, rates can change based upon actual experience with, and we're talking about liability rates here, with actual losses that occur. We have an actuary that looks at loss history and then projects what losses will occur and then calculates a premium that we utilize to go before the rate committee and the legislature. This actuary has been doing this for us for 25 years. And it's consistent with my statutory duty to ensure that the risk fund is actuarially sound. And so that's the way things work now in a pool. As many of you may know, we're able to spread the risk and the cost of the insurance program and accomplish with that leverage a much less expensive premium than any entity could then purchase out in the private sector. So that's the benefit of this pool. And as you can see here, the actuary looks at a 5-year history and claims roll off as that 5-year period then moves on, and that is used to change and adjust the rates. Moving on to the next slide, just wanted you to see some actual experience in other participating members of the pool. As you can see here, the yellow line in this slide, which pertains to our higher ed subgroup in the liability fund, it has experienced some ups and downs, and that's typically what you see in trends and you want to see. There may be spikes that occur here and there, and we try to maintain a level flow and wanting a steady premium charge. And so you can see that we've kind of run through that down the middle with some spikes, particularly in 2014. If we can move to the next slide. This is the slide that I need to talk to this group about. And this is a message that we've actually been communicating to business administrators and superintendents for over a year now, showing that commencing in fiscal year 2014 and then moving up through the last fiscal year, the loss experiences of our school districts have increased dramatically. And in fact, our actuary said that what he is seeing here, particularly in the last fiscal year, is really been unprecedented in all the years he's been doing this. Now then, these are liability claims. These are claims that are like bus accidents. They're claims where students are injured. Some have more dramatic injuries or losses, and can be a death relating to a student. And this goes across the whole gamut of our 41 school districts. So we see a lot of minor injuries. We see a fair amount of severe injuries. And part of that reason for the uptick is that we've had a number of catastrophic losses involving our school buses. There have been others as well, but I've had to go before the Legislative Management Committee, as has my predecessor. I've been in this role since December, to get settlement approval, and which is required by statute for claims in excess of $500,000. And so that's where we are now. Now what is important to note here is that, as you can see, the blue line being the actual charge premium, the yellow line being the actual loss and loss adjustment expenses. That's what the LAE stands for. That difference in those 4 fiscal years is $7.2 million between what was charged and what was paid out. And so we're in a very unique position relative to what we need to charge as premiums for the projected fiscal year 2018, 2019 correction. And then the question is, how do we recoup the 7.2 million of difference to ensure that we're actuarially sound and that we're solvent? Okay, if we can move to the next slide. Someone controlling this one?
It should move. I did move it.
Can I just ask about
Sure, sure.
You know, it always surprises me that we have all of these laws about seatbelts, and we have child seats with all of these, involved buckles here and buckles there, and we don't require that on our school buses. And you're here telling us about catastrophic injuries occurring with accidents in school buses. Are those two things related?
Not in the context of the losses we're experiencing. The losses we're experiencing are buses that are hitting pedestrians or hitting other motorists on the roadway, and which have resulted in deaths of students, deaths of other motorists, and other catastrophic injuries. So we do cover, under the PIP policy, the Personal Injury Protection Policy, we do cover injuries to students who are on a bus. But those limits are typically around $3,000, and we haven't had those types of severe losses where students have been injured while riding on a bus. We've had a few odd ones where a student has exited a bus while it was moving on the freeway, and so we have other things that occur. And I have to be very careful about discussing these claims because they are protected by GRAMA, and so I have to be very generic. And I can't really identify, particularly if it's in litigation, I can't really speak to those claims with any specificity. Yes.
Do you see a trend of bus drivers that are part-time versus full-time? And is there a trend that we can look at to maybe make some adjustments?
I can't clearly provide numbers to demonstrate my opinion. I have enough, I think, anecdotal information to understand and take this for whatever it's worth, and even some acknowledgments from some school districts that when the Affordable Care Act was implemented and became effective, decisions were made actually to reduce pay and benefits for those bus drivers so that they could reduce both retirement costs and also health care expenses.
So as a school teacher, I felt the same challenges. Is it because now they can only work 29 hours? Is that the, okay.
That is correct in some cases. I know some districts, the districts are very different about how they do this, so I don't want this to be construed as being a universal response to that question. And so it just, what we're seeing and what we're experiencing is that it's very difficult for the districts to attract and retain good bus drivers because of both the hours, the pay, and the benefits. And as a consequence, we have some concerns about that.
And these are all really good questions. We're getting down in the weeds of the operational side
Right.
of things that have nothing to do with the board, but they are really good questions. And I'm wondering if there's some additional information that we might be able to request on, you know, we talked up on buses and stuff, but there's some trending that's happening. There's got to be some trend data that you have that might be safe for us to see, and that might be number of incidences, the claims average per incidence that doesn't give up some of this data, and I believe that would probably be really helpful for a bunch of the LEAs that, of course, got their 75% premium hike.
Right.
That they can start mitigating some of that, or choosing methods, and then also if there's some things that with our organization that we can work on to kind of bring that back into check. But so that might be helpful moving. The reality is we're having a premium hike.
Right. And that reality is, I mean, just to cut to the chase, if you don't
I'll
mind.
let you get back to your presentation, but
Okay, but just to cut to the chase, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Mark, because what the actuary indicated was that we should, for the fiscal year 2019, there should be a 33% increase just in what's anticipated for losses in that year. But in terms of recapturing the 7.2 million, we are proposing that it be recaptured over the course of 3 years. But we'd look at it yearly to see how we're doing. In the meantime, we do have a plan in place to work with the transportation directors and the HR directors and to try to reduce both the employment claims and the bus claims if we can. A lot of that's out of our control, but we also work closely with the transportation director here in the Board of Education and have a wonderful relationship with him. So we appreciate that. So let's go on to the next slide if we could, Scott. Now, because of where we were, this is needless to say, this has created a lot of sleepless nights for us. And we've looked at ways to try to resolve this and soften the blow. And one of the ways is this option one. We have some $3 million in retained earnings in our workers' compensation fund, which is funded via payroll from state employees in executive branch agencies. And we have proposed to the rate committee and to the governor's office, and we intend to propose to the legislature that we use some of that money and move it into the liability fund. And if we can do that, which we doubt we can do, but we're still making that pitch, then it would only result in a 32.6% increase to the school districts and charter schools, Department of Transportation 2.7%, higher education 0.1%, other state agencies a negative 2.5%. That's what we want to do. It would be a one-time fix, meaning we'd still have to continue to work to bring a downward trend. So that's what we presented to the rate committee. They ultimately said because it's speculative, they can't adopt this. They'd have to depend upon the governor's office and the legislature. So option 2, which is the next slide, is really where we are. Yes.
I'm sorry, where did you say that that money was being held?
It's actually in our workers' compensation fund. We have a liability fund. We get premiums from all of our insured entities and put them in a liability fund from which we pay liability claims. We receive workers' compensation premiums via payroll from the state employees and executive branch agencies to the workers' compensation fund. And we have roughly $3 million sitting there as retained earnings at the end of this last fiscal year that we're proposing we use to soften this blow. So the rate committee rejected that option. It's not necessarily off the table, but we're going to continue to propose that. But as a consequence, this is what we are proposing, to both charge the 33% for fiscal year 19 and also to begin recapturing the 7.2 million. And we, like I say, we've talked to the school district superintendents, the business administrators, and they're aware of this at this point. So, and we wanted to get way out in front of this well before the legislative session.
You mentioned that only half the charter schools are with you. Are school districts required to be with you?
No, they are not.
Yeah, because I'm just like health insurance, I'm afraid, if the rates get too much, then the healthiest folks might start jumping ship and you're left with the sick folks. But so far, it hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened. We're aware that this is a big hit, and thus far, at least the responses that we've received is we've been messaging this is, okay, we've created this problem, we need to own it, we need to work on this together and ensure that the risk fund is solvent to pay our claims down the road.
Because districts with higher risk and other, you charge them higher rates?
No, not necessarily.
No.
Why not? It's based upon their history. Now, I can tell you as well, and I'll get to that question. We've actually analyzed what of the 4 groups within the risk fund, the liability fund, higher ed, school districts, charter schools, and state agencies. The entities or entity group that has most tapped into those resources has been the school district by and large. They've eclipsed the others in terms of the extent and cost of claims over the last 4 fiscal years. And so we do look at them distinctly in terms of calculating their premiums, and there may be differences in charges because we actually look at them differently. They are different, but under these circumstances, like I say, these premiums have been calculated over the years, and they're, as you look at the spreadsheet, they're actually reduced to a cost per pupil in terms of calculating that premium. So it depends on their behavior. That's the short answer.
But you said you charge them all the same rate, so it doesn't depend on their behavior. Like if I get in a car accident, my rates go up. You're saying if a district
No,
has
that's
much
not,
more.
if I said that, I want to correct that. We don't charge them the same rate. We charge
Okay.
them a rate based upon their loss experience and history.
Okay, good,
Right.
good.
Thank you. I apologize for that confusion. So moving on, past option 2. The next slide is probably where we can end for the sake of this discussion. This is, if things continue the way they are, this is what we're projecting our retained earnings and net income to be in the next few fiscal years. And so, again, as I have a statutory duty to ensure that we have the resources to pay these claims and to be actuarially sound, this is why we're proposing this rate increase. And that ends my presentation. I'm going to limit this to the liability premiums because that is the issue. The property premiums really aren't changing. as we go forward. So.
Okay, any question for Brian? Deputy Superintendent Jones, did you have something to add here?
Just so the so what of this, in addition to what Brian has said, is as the finance committee members, and ultimately when we report this to the board, is this is mainly for your situational awareness. That you represent districts, and if you're in a meeting or there's talk about the increase to premiums and all that, you're aware of the impact on that. There's some tie-ins to this too. When we discuss tomorrow the stakeholder request for pupil transportation, the from to, all that, there's some that would say, well, if we get more funding, we might be able to train bus drivers better or purchase better safety equipment. All these different kinds of things can come into play in that. I'm not going to speak that there's evidence that that would happen or anything like that, but it's certainly enough data out there that would support that an increase to the ability of the LEAs to have, the additional funding that would be from that ask would actually either help with the premiums or maybe hire better, highly skilled bus drivers, different things like that. So kind of keep that in mind, because there's always a relationship between what we present you as topics in different meetings. We always try to, as your staff, make sure that you're aware of the bigger picture, because you are the state board, and your decisions and what information you get has that effect across the entire state. We recognize that you represent particular districts within the state, but knowing what's going on the left and the right is always a good thing. So we just want to make sure you were aware of this situation.
Okay, did you have something you wanted to add?
I do, Mark. Pertaining to a question that you mentioned earlier about trends, we have done that. We have handed that out to the districts. What I can share you in a very generic way is in our auto liability claims, we have had between 2010 and 2013 fiscal years where we were low, where you saw that trend start to increase. Fiscal year 2014 through 2017, as to auto liability negligence claims, we've had an 823% increase in those costs. As to failure to obey traffic laws under auto liability claims, we've had a 176% increase. And those are inattentive driving. We've actually had a small reduction, but we've also had under general liability negligence supervision a 210% increase. Under student activities, that can be anything from a cheerleading injury to something that happens on the playground, to a student cutting off part of a hand in a saw, stuff like that. We've had a 190% increase. Discrimination claims, 208% increase. So we've had a big uptick in the last 4 fiscal years, and so that's what we're talking about here. So anyway, I think, Brittany, you had a...
Yes, Brittany.
Some of my questions have been answered as you've gone forward. This is a difficult thing to listen to as you look, because it seems like there was some stability in it, and then there's been a drastic increase over time. So part of my question, and you may not be able to answer it, is more of just kind of a thought as we look at financing. But schools are required to transport students and to provide much of what puts them in harm's way, such as recess and activities and wood shop, et cetera. And so I guess it's how do we look at this holistically and help to mitigate, because obviously there's been a change over time, without decreasing the access for our students to some of these things. Because it feels like when we start talking about risk, all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, let's wrap our kids in bubble wrap and they can't go out to play anymore. We've already gotten rid of the swings and all the fun things, et cetera. And so I guess it's just a thought of, can we find out what some of the reasons what has changed in those 4 years, so that we don't overreact and create a situation where we are not providing services that the students need. So anyway.
I agree completely, and that's what we are doing. We have a loss control group in our office of professionals that are trained and experienced in both physical liability and employment liability. I've asked them to actually divert their attention more toward the school districts and collaborating with them. As I mentioned, we are going to get with the transportation directors and talk about, we're going to do root cause analyses on, which we do already. But when a claim occurs above a certain value, we're going to actually meet with them and do a root cause analysis with them, and then look at ways to mitigate down the road. So we are shifting our focus because of what has happened here over the past 4 fiscal years to devote most of our resources to the school districts and do the very things you're talking about. Sometimes, notwithstanding all we do, things happen. And so there's that balance that we have to really try to maintain in terms of allowing people to experience life and trying to keep it safe in the process. So it's a very challenging and sensitive issue.
So if I might, Kathleen or Board Member Reeby, please go. I've got my thoughts. I know exactly what I want to say, so you go first.
Thank you. I think another part of Brittany's concern is that when we have problems anywhere in our school and we see a quote-unquote weakness, for lack of a better term, it has other costs. So when you have a bus driver that has problems on the road, it doesn't end when they drop the kids off. That problem is all day long. You're calling people down to the office. So this is a very real expense, but there's also many other expenses behind this. When you have people that are on the playground playing recess and you have a person you hired for 29 hours, then you hire somebody else for 29 hours, recess becomes a big problem. So it's not just this amount of money we're spending, it's all the money that we're spending on top of that to mitigate this problem, and then dealing with all those problems, lost instructional time, lost administration time. So to mitigate this problem would help with our education side, and that is really what we're all here for.
Thank you. One concern I have when I've seen the numbers and was looking at this, and I'm not sure on the awareness side, I don't know if I was asleep at the wheel while this was happening, but this trend started not last year or the year before that. And just when you start seeing these trend lines going up, and I know that there's a difference between public and private, but private has to react really quick because there's things called EMRs and all these other little safety things that keep you in business. That when I've seen all these numbers, I'm going, I really wish somehow I could have seen these numbers or these trends earlier. And my experience with risk when I was on a local board was, oh, here comes risk, and they're going to talk about the trip and fall, the bad piece of carpet, the extension cord, and a few things like that. And from what I'm seeing and here, that's probably all part of this, but it's bigger than that. And so I guess it sounds like a little bit of a complaint, but of a concern, and I'm not sure we're on the receiving end of the data, on the receiving end of this situation, but I'm curious on our end, do we have any involvement in any of your what was it called? Your loss, I don't know, let's see, you called it your rate committee. Is there stakeholders in there that are out of the education community that can say, hey, this is a big concern. We need to nip this in the bud now. So we've got to push this safety initiative more so than the annual typical, we're going to come into the school, do evaluation. Oh, got to put those extension cords up. I think educators all know what I'm talking about when they're in their schools, and let's make sure the carpet's glued down really well, and where's that rail that they talked about last year, and that what can be done? Are you the ones, are you to do it, or is it a committee? Is it us by policy? Is it, because there are victims in here. All this claim stuff, there's victims. You mentioned a little bit about, I think you said something about discrimination and a few things like this. Who pushes that water to the end of the road? Is that your organization or a combination of organizations?
Let me let me answer, I'll try to answer the multiple questions that were in there, if you don't mind. The
I
first,
certainly can repeat.
No,
I'd
that's
like
fine.
On the accountability.
No,
navigate.
I appreciate this question. I appreciate this dialogue. We have, in statute, the rate committee consists of executive branch directors, executives. Right now, there are no schools on that rate committee, nor are there any universities on that rate committee. So that is one of the reasons why I've been going out to the boards, to the school district superintendents and the business administrators to message this, and I've been showing them this trend for some time and talking about not only with the superintendents, but the business administrators, the HR directors, the transportation directors. We're at the table with them to talk about these trends and concerns that we have, and we make recommendations, but we have no authority to implement those. And so I think it would be a good idea to have representation on the rate committee from some of the school districts. I think that would be helpful to all of us. But getting to this other question you have, we are not just focusing on, as important as or unimportant as they may seem, on the trip and fall hazards. We are talking about these big wrongful death claims, these discrimination claims that affect students, their families, communities in a very significant way. And these are very hard things to deal with, but we need the collaboration of and support of superintendents on down to ensure that we're able to implement measures that can reduce these losses. We all know that things don't work unless you have that direction from the top. And there are a million priorities that these good superintendents and business administrators are managing. I think we have their attention. They seem to really, at least those that have vocalized their response to this rate increase, have said, okay, we need to really, we need to make this a priority and work to do this, to reduce these losses. Now, there are other things at play. A lot of these losses are occurring in this larger metropolitan area where we have population increase, we have more traffic, and it's just a fact of our society here that we're more congested here. Nonetheless, the accidents that we're seeing with the buses, virtually every one was preventable. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about could and should have been prevented. And that's what we want to do. I have, in my staff, my office, I have 10 loss control professionals working with 41 school districts, about 70 charter schools, all of the colleges and universities, and all the state agencies. We rely upon our insureds to take responsibility and be accountable for these things that are creating these consequences that are out of our control. But we're there to help and support in every way. So.
Board Member Cannon, thank
Yeah.
you.
I appreciated the question from Mark and your response. You indicated that there's no representative for school and university stakeholders on the rate committee. Who does appoint the rate committee?
The rate committee consists in statute. The legislature has indicated who is to serve on that committee. So they would be the ones that would need to make changes to that statute to bring others on.
This would require statutory change.
It would.
Okay.
And they are open meetings, so we do have others come from these other groups we insure, but I have not seen a school district representative other than those from this board who have come, or from the Board of Education who have come to hear what's going on. I would like to see that happen.
Okay, so my gut feeling when I see this is you're proposing a 32.6% increase in option one, but the committee decided they didn't want to forego that extra 3 million, so ultimately you're proposing a 75.1% increase. I'm thinking, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is so
I think it's a little
much.
different than that. I think the committee
Right.
is saying 75. He's advocating 32 if, and there's a bunch of ifs that would
But
have to happen to take money
Didn't you
from
say
one
the committee
pot.
wasn't in favor of that?
The committee understandably decided that because option one, which is what we want to do, to transfer those funds from the workers' comp fund to another fund requires legislative approval. And because we don't have that, the rate committee said that they couldn't, given that it was speculative as to whether the legislature would grant that request, they felt like their only choice was to go with option two. So that's what happened.
So my ultimate question is, have you received feedback from school districts about this proposal? Have
Well-
they seen it yet? Or
Oh,
they-
yes. They've seen this, everything that you've seen here, they've seen and more. We've talked about their claims, their experience. We've been very transparent with them and blunt about what's going on.
And their response?
The school district? The school districts obviously would prefer option one, as we would. But those that have vocalized a response to this have indicated that the data shows what's happened. The data shows we need to get this under control, and is also showing that the school districts in particular, really need to own this problem and ensure that the fund is solvent to pay these claims as they go forward. So their response has been supportive of those who have spoken. There may be other opinions of those that haven't spoken out loud. So I can't speak for all of the superintendents or the business administrators. Obviously, this is disconcerting to everyone.
Let's go with board member, or Vice Chair Cummins, and then board member Wright.
Just for clarification, for me, the premiums that are mentioned, is that a per school premium or a per LEA premium? Or is it, because you mentioned a per pupil amount as well?
The way the actuary does this, excuse me, is looks at lost history and then calculates a premium that is then reduced to a per pupil cost. And then what happens, so that it becomes an aggregate premium amount. Then what happens is that there is an advisory committee which consists of some superintendents and some business administrators who sit down and vote on how to allocate that premium, so that they're actually spreading the risk somewhat, so that if a small district gets a big claim and that happens, they're not absorbing the whole claim, but they're spreading some of that risk and cost among the other districts. So there's a sharing and a pooling within that group.
So, yeah, so $9,864 premium is for a school?
No, that's the total.
That's the
nine.
total that's collected
that's-
from 41 districts and 70 charter schools?
That is not,
Sorry.
that is the total that will be collected, yes, from those entities.
So the per day?
No, per
a year?
per year.
Annual.
For fiscal year 2019. So that, we're projecting this. The challenge with the way things work is we have to,
Hold on a second, Brian.
Yeah, jump in.
Numbers,
Okay, so that chart is in thousands. So that number is.
Numbers in thousands, so
Right,
it's,
it's
that's
9.8
thousands.
million.
9.8 million.
9.8 million.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's like, why are we
Yeah.
having this
Yes.
conversation about?
Thank you. Yeah,
It's 9.8 million.
Okay.
yeah,
It's a fun way to make the number look a little smaller.
right.
Okay, board
Yep.
member Ryan, we need to probably move on this pretty quick too, so.
Quick, yeah, be quicker. Do you offer data policies for like data theft? Now do
We
we have to go out in the
actually,
market?
we actually do through our brokers. We have two
Okay.
brokers that we have through an RFP, Aon and Morton, and they have worked with. In fact, it is Aon that has worked with all of the LEAs. Virtually all of them have elected to procure data security insurance, cyber security insurance. And so that's been a movement that we've gotten underway for the about 3 years ago. And I believe all but a few are on board at this point.
Okay. And is government immunity working? They're not piercing that, are they?
You know,
We're trying with plaintiffs' attorneys.
it is still working, but it's,
You're hedging.
I have to be,
If you don't want to say it in public, that's okay.
it's still working. It's a policy of the legislature as to whether they do this or not. I recently appeared before the Government Ops Committee to explain how our caps work, our tort caps, and compared it with other states. We think it's working because it's helping keep the cost of insurance down, the cost of claims down. On the other hand, there is a strong public policy that I understand that with tort caps, sometimes individuals who are injured by state actors are not fully compensated. So that's the other balance. We think the tort caps provide some very important stability to this state.
Right. Is there any other questions regarding this? Thank you for being here and presenting this. I'm still going to follow up with a request for some information. I think it would be good for us to get in here for that, kind of some of that data that's not protected,
You bet.
and that would kind of help shed a light to how some of the.
I'm more than happy to do that and inform this
And-
group.
And so, thank you for your visit. It was good seeing you last night.
to see you.
And he does get down into, they do get into the details with the LEAs.
Yeah.
Do you do that annually?
We try to,
Okay.
and that is one of my initiatives going forward, is wanting to get with each school board, which hasn't been the practice of our office, but I want at least every 3 years cycle through if I can, so.
Well, thank you for dealing with the risk and being blunt and bold in a lot of those districts, telling them where they need to improve. So, and thank you for the report.
Thank you for the invitation, and I appreciate your questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the mic over to Vice Chair Joe Wright to finish the rest of the meeting. I believe we're moving on to 1.2 and
1.2, review and approve significant year-end accruals. Should we start with Scott or Natalie? Scott?
I'll tee it up. What we're counting on, or your staff is counting on, is the memory of all of you as members of the Finance Committee that this is an integral part of year-end close. And what this is we have to come to you and ask for your permission to go ahead and book an accrual, just to make sure this is the last one. It's part of the process where we send up our information. It's part of the CAFR, what's called the CAFR, and that's audited or looked at or reviewed, I guess I should say, and then they determine, well, to balance this, you need to book this accrual. So I'll turn it over to Natalie so she can tell you like program or what funding, whatever the accrual's made up of.
If you'll remember previously, and we didn't put the memo in from before because we didn't want you to have to try to decipher that, we've already booked an accrual for our LEA federal and state programs. And we also booked an accrual that you approved for our state programs as well, or the state programs and the federal. So we're covered with LEAs. What we hadn't previously booked is related to our community-based organizations and higher ed institutions. We provide or make awards to colleges and universities, community-based organizations from our federal programs. The accrual that we're proposing is $8,116,709. The reason that we're bringing this to your attention, audit standards require that management or the board approve significant accruals to ensure that those accruals are adequately disclosed to those who are responsible for financial statements. And so the accrual has actually already been booked in order to maintain and keep in with some timelines so state finance can get the CAFR prepared. We worked this out with state finance earlier last week and this week, but we wanted to make you aware of it, answer any questions that you had related to it, and we do need action to ratify, if you will, the booking of that accrual for the financial statements for 2017.
So I think, I'm going to put this in my layman's language, I think what I understand is we've already incurred these expenses, we need to pay for them from this fiscal year, but the process requires that we formally approve it. And if we don't formally approve it, then we'd essentially default on those payments.
No. So, but I'm glad we clarified. So essentially what this means is that these community-based organizations and institutes of higher education incurred the expenditure. They did whatever they needed to do to earn the money, if you will, and they sent those reimbursement requests in after the fiscal year. We have funds sufficient for them. They're part of the awards that we made. It's just part of converting our cash records into accrual is we have to appropriately recognize what our actual expenditures were in the fiscal year. And since those expenditures were liabilities to the state at the end of the year, we just have to record those.
So we wouldn't default, but it would be messier on accounting. It wouldn't present as realistic data.
If we didn't book it, the auditors would require us to book it, and we would have a material weakness in our financial statements. And then the auditors would come and tell you that we did something bad. So we would like that to not happen.
Very bad example for all our LEAs as well. Okay, I have no further questions. Any other comments or thoughts?
So my understanding, Natalie, is that we are booking, then submitting these accruals to state finance.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to make a motion that the board, that we book our accruals and submit to the state finance. That's simple.
We have a motion, and thanks Board Member Cannon. We know we don't need a second. Still appreciate her insight. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed, unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 1.3, carry forward amounts by section and program. So we're on to 1.3. Deputy Jones, would you like to take this for us?
Well, I can't talk or breathe right now, so I'm going to turn it over to Natalie because Cammie got this Zupa soup for me. I think she put like some kind of pepper in there that just really because I think she was mad at me today. So I'm just going to turn this over to Natalie and let her run it. Okay? So thank you. So go ahead. So emotional. I know. Well, accruals.
Didn't know accruals were so emotional.
I just love accruals.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
Do we have a medic available? Get a medic in the room, please.
Well, we're over here before we get. Can I speak?
Sure.
Okay. This can be done in a variety of ways. There's the detail. There's what is the best way for us to take this on efficiently? And we need to probably stick to that, not deflect. So that is the question. You haven't answered.
That was my question
I'll
to
turn
you.
this back over.
I think it depends as to what level the committee members want to look into the carryovers. Maybe an efficient way to scroll through this, if I can give you a little background as to how we came up with these carryover numbers and what the presentations that have been provided to you mean. The carryover, as we have calculated it, has also been submitted to state finance as part of our closed package. We made a decision this year that sections would only provide spend plans for approval for items or for programs that were less than $50,000. The reason we made that decision is oftentimes when we have vacancies, when we have turnover in positions, we could accrue vacancy savings that are one time just in turnover and transition. And we're making and requiring a lot of work of our sections for amounts that are relatively immaterial, if you will. So a couple of things that are different this year than have been in the past. Every carryover balance is sticking with its program. In the past, there was a practice of sweeping everything up into a discretionary account, and it was very difficult to follow the character of the funds. So we're not doing that anymore. All state funds are staying within this section, unless it's prioritized to be moved by the board. All state funds are staying within the individual section that they were appropriated to, and within the individual programs that they were appropriated to. State funds are largely unrestricted. We did not present or prepare for the board any federal funds or restricted funds that cannot be used for other purposes as established through statute or legislation or private grants. Federal grants aren't on this list because they have a restricted purpose and the board doesn't necessarily need to approve those. So the list that we prepared and submitted to you, I have a summary list, and then all of the sections who had carryover that exceeded that $50,000 have prepared spend plans for each of those programs. If you would like us to go through just the ones that have spend plans, we can quickly bring them up and talk about each one of them. We can bring them up and you can ask questions if you have them. I'm not sure at what level you want to review, and we're happy to do whatever it is you want us to do.
Can I comment? Sure. Really quick. What we've done in the past, like Natalie said, is some of them did have spend plans as they were having. We need to address all the carryover, and we addressed it separately in the past. And some of them, they didn't have them formally written, but we did have a discussion on, what are you going to do with this, which was basically their spend plan. So in the past, we did talk about the carryover. We did talk about the use of the funds, and sometimes we just swept it because we needed it. We had other priorities at that time, or to put that into another place. Is that safe to say? Am I correct in?
Yes.
In that? So now before us, which is different, is we have our carryover. Some of those significant groups there have spend plans that we've been able to review, but we still need to address them and make the recommendation to the board tomorrow. So we're all in compliance and everything can move forward. So it might be best, if I might recommend, and I lost my website here, is to hit each one and see if there's a question. And if not, because you're chairing this, then we'll propose a motion to move the carry forward.
Chair Huntsman, unless I'm missing something, I believe, the intent here is to just leave all of the remaining funds in each section unless tonight we decide to do that otherwise, correct? So we're basically
That's the
looking
end
for,
result.
I think Scott and Natalie and rest staff, if you think that some section has too much, or, then help us know. I don't know if any board members already have opinions on that. I know I don't. So, Scott and Natalie, why don't you take us through each one? Scott and Natalie, do you just, let's ask at the outset so it's not just taking everyone's time. Do you think that there are sums that we ought to move around?
We were just discussing that. I think that for most of the spend plans, and to bring the board members back to one of the directives that we were given. There were 4 things that I believe we were asked to fund out of carryover prior to assigning carryover. The first one is related to the $600,000 related to capital improvements. In the board's budget, there are a couple of carryover lines that are currently unobligated from 16 and 17. One of those, we are suggesting that the board spend, essentially the board spend plan for that area would be, so in this board priorities, this project right here, I don't know how to get rid of that. We are suggesting of the $607,000 left over from the board priorities line from fiscal year 16, that we use that $600,000 as the capital projects fund that was authorized by board leadership. There was another request to, and I believe this was a request that came from staff, to provide a somewhat of a legal fund, not really a fund, but a contingency, if you will, in the event of lawsuits, those kinds of things. There was actually already a line in the board's budget that was set aside for this that wasn't utilized in the prior year. So from fiscal year 15, there's $110,408 that was set aside for this very purpose. That wasn't used or utilized in any way in fiscal year 16 or 17. And so we suggest that we just retain those funds in that area for this purpose, that it be designated by the board as areas that the board could utilize in the event of a legal issue or a lawsuit of some kind. What were the other 2 things? Oh, the eco passes. The Deputy Superintendent Jones has some carryover left over in his budget pertaining to some of the capital projects that were authorized this year, and some of the funds that were set aside for independent contractors and some of the indirect cost things that we were able to get resolved. So we were able to find the $100,000 for the eco passes within his existing carryover, and so we're recommending that we pay for the eco passes out of there. And there's one more thing.
What are eco passes?
They are the rider passes for UTA for Front Runner. And it was a program that was developed a few years ago with the governor's office, and an appropriation didn't come through. So we've been, the DAS, the Division of Administrative Services, is under contract with UTA. So it's not an obligation on our part. It's just we find a high level of ridership with us and USDB employees, especially during the winter months, that's really conducive to transportation, to cleaner air, all those types of things. So they're eco passes, basically what they're.
The one last item was related to a discretionary fund for the superintendent. As we evaluated the carryover in the superintendent's budget, there was a discretionary fund established last year that wasn't completely utilized. There was also some vacancy savings related to that position. And so there are sufficient funds in the carryover in that specific program already to achieve the $150,000 that was requested. And so we feel that within the board's budget alone and some of the other areas, we have funded all of those initial requests. And other than that, I don't know that there are any substantial, again, it would largely just be related to how much detail you want to go through by program. So related to CTE, I'm not going to list through every program, but on the in the corner over here on the right, you'll see the spend plan disposition. Right here, we made a list of what it is that you should potentially be considering. I'm going to make this a little smaller so I can see what I'm doing. So within CTE, there are 5 spend plans that were prepared for you. Actually, there's probably 2. One is related to general financial literacy, and one is related to computer science. In all cases, I believe that a substantial amount of those funds were obligated to existing contracts or things that have already been incurred. There were smaller, minor amounts that the section wanted to retain to fulfill or stick with the same exact purposes that were established with the original programs. I don't think that there's anything there that needs to be discussed further unless you have any specific questions. Okay. Sorry, I can't drive today. Within the policy and communications budget, there are 2 areas. One of them is related to the Chief Privacy Officer's budget, and the other one is, well, they're both related to the Chief Privacy Officer's budget. There are 2 areas within there. I think that one thing that we would probably request board action on is the grant program, related within the policy and communication budget. So I will bring that up really quick.
So while she's bringing that up, Chair, if you'll note that all the directors are here, including Whitney from this particular portion of that, to speak to their plan for those dollars. So you can invite them up at any time, or, if you don't have any questions and want to, save the time, but almost every section's represented here. So, if you have specific questions on that. But more so what this demonstrates, though, too, is the ownership of our directors or our leads in our sections, that they're tracking their budget. Your staff at the table here, we're funds control and they're funds management. And so it's their input that matters to you, because they're the ones that are, responsible for the execution of the funding in the best interests of the individual student and your objectives as a board. So at any course of any of the sections that we review here, you can invite them forward, okay?
Sure.
I was going to say, can I just add
Yeah.
something here? And this is really good, and all the directors, there's really good. You did a really good job at being accountable here, and what you're up to, and you're all here to answer some questions on that. And I had one, if I could, on the charter school carry forward. Did I see? Oh, there she is. I didn't see you. So I
Would you
wouldn't mind
like-
asking her a question, a couple of questions.
Jennifer, would you please come to the microphone?
Just a couple of questions. On your statement here where it said the charter board has not approved a full spend plan, can you explain, but they'll probably approve this? Can you help me?
So we did not, the carry forward funds were not finished by the time we had our last board meeting. And so our next board meeting is in November. And so we haven't been able to present the plan or any of our ideas to them yet, because there hasn't been a meeting since we've had the
Okay,
funds.
this is board leadership and engagement. It's kind of the purpose for this. This is a little bit different, and my point here, my question here is regarding. So we approve this, including the spend plan, and then the section or something deviates from that. Does that have to come back to us? That was going to be my question.
Okay. You approve it pending the approval of the SCSB, right? And then if it's altered or anything like that, Jennifer would let us know, and then we'd advise you accordingly throughout the year. Remember, you get updates, periodic updates by section in your finance committee. Now, if there is a significant deviation, of what you've approved here, in this case, it's like you said, it's a little unique in the sense that timing-wise, we're meeting before their board is meeting. So we support them, and we do that. But if they were to say, no, now we're going to use it for something else, we could report that as part of her section review when she comes in front of you later on. That's a lot of the reason why we have the section reviews. If a section is already gone and there's a significant change, then we would go ahead and invite them back, if that makes sense. So, like, you had internal audit, on Friday you'll have internal audit section report to you. So if there's any alterations that Debbie wants to make or give after that occurs that month, we'd probably invite her back, if it was really something really big. If it was like, well, now we're going to pay $2,000 for travel instead of buying widgets or something, we wouldn't bother you with that. But if it's, a significant deviation from what you're approving, definitely. So
That answers my question. Board Member Ryan. So thank you, unless there's another question for it.
So currently it says the following needs. This is kind of your tentative plan upon approval.
Correct.
Okay, so it's kind of like all the ones, but it just never really got approved.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, we haven't had the chance to
Yeah.
get it approved yet.
Okay.
Board member comments?
This seems like a decent chunk of change for this carry forward, and I'm just curious why you have so much going forward.
So we've been short-staffed for quite a while, or understaffed, I guess. We are now, we have one more hire, but other than that, we are fully staffed. And so going forward, we would not see this kind of carry forward.
Board Member Cummings.
Just a follow-up question. You're talking in here about time-limited employees, and so I'm guessing that would mean that you're just going to use this funding for temporary services, but then your new employees would fill in, and you wouldn't have this much carry forward in the future now that you're fully staffed?
So the time-limited employees, so like for the IT developer, that is to develop an application. And then once that application's developed, you don't need the IT developer anymore. So it is for one-time projects where we need the extra manpower to just get that going. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, you can be seated.
Sorry.
Board Member Reby, you have something?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jennifer.
Jennifer, can you come back?
I'm so sorry. As I'm looking at other people's spend plans, they've put dollar amounts to that. Can we agree to this and then have dollar amounts added to it afterwards? Okay. Thanks. No question.
Thank you, Jennifer. Please be respectful of the director of our State Charter School Board, board members. Scott, we'll turn time back to you.
The only thing that I was, as we were kind of going down the list, the first one was the CPO budget. The spend plan was outlined for the carryover that they have. They have a lot of carryover with one-time funds. Those were provided before we had a CPO on board. The spend plan that they've put together appears to align with statute and all the objectives of the data privacy objectives. There was one issue, and we just wanted to make sure that board members were aware of that, is the request to provide grants to LEAs out of this budget for compliance issues related to student privacy and creating the metadata dictionary, I believe. We don't largely see grants out of office budgets very often. It happens occasionally, but not too often, and we just wanted to make sure you were aware of that.
Okay. Is staff looking to us for questions or?
I'll keep going unless you have questions.
Okay, you keep.
We'll take you section by section. We'll brief by what's called exception. We'll, like Natalie just did for the data privacy budget, or on that too. If there's something that we need to draw your attention to, we will on that. Something, unique or significant of that particular budget.
Chair Huntsman.
So at the end of this, if we're going section by section, do you want a motion to approve their carry forward, or do we just wrap it up at the very end?
You just wrap it up at the very end. Holistically, staff are respectfully requesting a motion where you say, or a motion to advise the board, or, that would involve the entire board, approving the carry forward amounts by section for the entire agency as a recommendation from you to the entire board, something along that line.
All right.
So, if you have exceptions, though, or anything like that, then we need you to draw that out. So.
Moving along, the next section is related to SAS. SAS was not asked, SAS and assessment were both not asked to provide spend plans at this time. We have some vacancies in the leadership in the assessment department and felt that it would be most appropriate to have the assistant superintendent over that area be and participate in the spend plan creation. Again, the carryover amounts, if they're approved, the carryover amounts would stay in the budgets pending a creation of a spend plan by the assistant. The same thing would be related to SAS. I've had conversations with Assistant Superintendent Voorhees. We're working through some of the reorganization moves that were made during this current fiscal year for SAS, and are working out realignments and the consolidation of those two SAS and special ed sections. And so again, we request that the carryover amounts that were identified for SAS that are unrestricted be left in those budget areas, and then a spend plan would be approved at a later date for the use of those funds when we have more time to establish those.
My recommendation would be that those spend plans come to you as part of their section reviews, during the finance committee, because that section review would update their budget anyway, and then you get that. So the process is pretty sound if you were allowed to do that.
I believe we've already covered the charter schools area. Law and legislation, all of their carryover remained under the threshold, so we recommend that stay within the budget. Within financial operations, there are some carryover amounts, and I'll just give you the quick 2-second summary. The SOEP program, that is the statewide online education program, and I spelled that backwards, sorry. A lot of the funds related to the home and private, those are funds obligated to pay for the tuition costs for private school students who enroll in the SOEP program. Those funds aren't paid out to the providers until students complete courses. So a large portion of those funds are obligated. They're only usable for that purpose, and they're obligated for tuition payments to students. There is $258,000 related to a construction RFP. These funds were provided by the legislature a couple of years ago to revise and work on our construction manual. We're still trying to work through how we feel those funds would be best utilized, but we have some plans that we'd like to execute quite soon. Again, they're restricted for that purpose, but just to bring you aware, there are, as Jennifer indicated, financial operations has some vacancy savings related to being understaffed, not being able to fill positions. We think we're on a good track to use all that money up this year, but these carryover amounts we're requesting to retain in order to fund the cost of the grants management system and to hire a couple of contractors to help us get into our new systems. If there's no questions related to that, those plans were also put forth.
Just to clarify, where it says SEOP and SOEP, they all should be SOEP, is that correct?
Yes, apparently I get dyslexic at midnight, so yes.
Well, we used to have SEOPs, so.
Yes, it's a bad acronym to mess up. The IT department, most of their actually I think all of their carryover is obligated pertaining to contracts that have been entered into to achieve various objectives of IT, so their funds are already tied up with those areas. Special education and data and statistics didn't have any carryover that fell above the threshold. The Board of Education, within the Board of Education, there are within the board admin, there's $482,000 that is unrestricted. That will be available to the board to fulfill your mission. We obviously don't have a spend plan for the board because we didn't. I didn't know who to send one to. And so I'm unsure how you want to obligate or prioritize your own funds, but that is available. There's land exchange money that's available. I believe land exchange has restrictions in code, and we could provide those to you so you're aware of what the requirements are for the use of that funding.
So we've gone a couple of years now where there's been money in the board's budget to it. What I've seen done in the past by boards is the finance committee will actually use an agenda item for the purpose of recommending how to spend that money. Does that make sense? And then take it back to the board. These are pretty good amounts. I mean, and so if there's something you want, travel, training, we want to improve the boardrooms, different things like that. That's typically how it's done. Is that the finance committee would convene and we make it an agenda item. We break these amounts out to you and say, hey, here's what's available. What else, in addition to just the normal expenditures like your travel or your per diem reimbursements, the payroll, things like that. What else do you want to do and see? So just consider that.
Let's see. The competency baseline is restricted for LEA grants. That's something that was appropriated to the board's budget that we just left there so that we could find it later, but I believe it's being managed by Teaching and Learning. The federal mineral lease amount, so the carryover related to our federal mineral lease is $872 to almost $73,000. Of course, that includes all of our current year revenue. We continue to see declining amounts in federal mineral lease. It is our desire, and I believe we have removed most people from federal mineral lease in the current year. We did in the past have a lot of employees or a few employees in various sections being paid for with this revenue source, but if you recall, this is one-time money or not really sure money, and so these funds are sitting in the board's budget and are available for prioritization. There is a statute that governs what they can be used for, and we can provide that to you so that the board can establish priorities out of those dollars.
Do you remember what the uses were just off the top of your head?
Experimental and rural
For FML,
FML.
research and development. Research,
Yeah.
experimental research and development.
R&D.
R&D.
And we recommend that those be one-time costs that don't incur ongoing obligations, seeing as this revenue source continues to decline on an annual basis. The next two items are related to board priorities. They're, again, that one line, the $600,000 line. We recommend that this is what is established as our capital improvements fund to fund some of the improvements to the buildings and address some of the risks that we have in the buildings. And that spend plan, I believe, was provided in Board Executive Committee. The next line, board priorities line, the one that's $287,000, again, that would be up to the board to decide how to prioritize those funds as well. Also sitting in the board's budget are funds set aside from the adaptive test licensing fees. That $1.5 million was obligated in the prior fiscal years for the grants management and the ERP systems. Those funds, we have contracts related to some of those systems and are looking to modifying and issuing an ERP for areas that we still haven't been able to achieve through finance. So that's what the planned use of those funds are for. The next one is related to the legal fund, as I indicated earlier. The last one, internal audit, is a part of the board's budget. They have prepared a spend plan. Their spend plan appears to be in alignment with their mission and objectives. There's nothing of note, I don't believe, within that spend plan that should be discussed. There's no questions.
Yeah. Just let me ask a question. So I remember going over the things that were needed for the building and so forth. The building is owned by the state, is that correct? Who has ownership of the building and
Yeah.
who ultimately has responsibility for keeping it up to code and that type of thing?
The DFCM.
DFCM does.
Yes.
So is it appropriate for us to be putting out $600,000 to upgrade the building?
So if we do want to do upgrades beyond what they have, or they will provide as part of within their budget, they being DFCM, we do have to pay for those. Their budget is basically O&M, operations and maintenance. What are the very basic things, lights, carpet once in a while, different things like that. If you recall, I believe it was last month we put that list or the items in
that's
front
what
of
I'm
you.
thinking of.
Yes, yeah. So that's what they're going to support as far as what they define as O&M.
Yeah.
So if we want to reconfigure office space, we do need to pay that out of our own budget.
Well, and
because-
isn't there some hole in the elevators or something?
Well,
or water,
that's there.
that kind of
Okay,
thing?
so
But
that's.
I'm just
yes.
wondering,
Yeah.
who owns the problem? Do we pay rent on this, or do we just get it from the state?
We get it from the state if we pay the O&M for it, though.
And we pay
by,
O&M
by
for
square
it.
footage. I'm sorry?
We are paying.
Yes, yeah, 469,000, I think. Just under $5 a square foot. So, and I'm glad Cammie brought that up. It would be very difficult for us to find a place that we would be only paying $5 per square foot anywhere in the area. It's an older building for sure, but they're just going to provide the basic safety / O&M funding.
Is there any benefit to us other than having it nicer for us to live with, to making improvements to the building?
Is there a benefit? Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, for instance, this area out here that the superintendent is designing, to be a collaborative area, a workspace. The additional office space for additional staff that we have that's conducive to like our AGs needing, private offices to do that. See, DFCM won't pay for that because they're saying, well, you already have the cubicle space or you already have all that too, right? So anytime we want to increase the capability of the facility, that's on us. So.
Okay, thanks.
did you still have a few more, Natalie?
There are a few more. I think we're almost done. The next one is related to the individuals and staff that are housed within the state ICP. Presented for you today is only the state funds that are sitting in there. The superintendent has provided a spend plan as well as the deputy superintendent of operations. The superintendent spend plan is largely just to retain the funds and use that as the discretionary that was approved. The deputy superintendent, some of the about $120,000 really out of this carryover line item right here from fiscal year 16 is obligated to some of those improvements from prior year that haven't been paid for yet. We haven't been received bills from the entities who performed work towards the end of the year, or we have. Remember, these were numbers as of the end of June. We have and we've already paid those. So those funds are obligated. An additional $100,000 is being used to fund the UTA Eco Passes. The remainder is around $80,000, and that's prioritized for work with contractors, work with staff, and to pay off some of the third-party entities that we're working with to provide expertise. Let's see. Teaching and learning. Yeah.
So we want to just take a little bit more time on this particular section for one reason. This is not news. There was a dual language immersion audit that occurred. We identified some particular transactions that didn't have the supporting documents, so they amount to what's termed as unallowable costs. We have the ability now to close the grant out. It's the flagship grant, which is related to the Chinese language instruction as part of that program. What's the total on it? 542,000. So what we would do is turn that money over. So that's the amount that's basically calculated based on the unallowable costs. We anticipated this. We actually anticipated much more, somewhere up around 1.2 million potentially, but this would settle that situation and close it out where we would be able to pay BYU that money so they can, again, close the grant out. And then there's additional information here on spend plans for that particular section.
I think the only thing of note related to teaching and learning, unless you want to have conversations about those items, is that we have identified within their carryover sufficient amounts to make the repayment. We've also identified nearly all of the funds related to setting aside any additional funds that may be required from the feds related to the StarTalk grant. Dual merger, or the flagship and the StarTalk grant, had the same kinds of issues, and the question costs related to those programs are identified in the state auditor's report. That auditor's report has been provided to our federal entities. Half of the amount was already requested back. We do not currently have a request for the StarTalk funds, but would like to set aside sufficient funds to pay that back if it's required. The StarTalk amount is $335,000. I believe we've found within the carryover $240,000, 48 somewhere around in there, and there's still another about $124,000 that needs to be prioritized and found. We ran out of time to kind of get through that today, and I just remembered that we hadn't resolved that issue before, so sorry, Diana. Other than that, I think those are the only two issues that we still have related to teaching and learning. The rest of their spend plans appear to conform with all of the requirements of the programs where the funds are currently. And so I think what the request would be probably from teaching and learning is to approve their spend plans as presented with the instruction for staff to go and find the rest of those funds to set aside, and then clear that through whoever needs to have that be cleared through the board, or if you want us to bring us back potentially when we do their section budget report, or when we bring back assessments and SASs, we could bring that piece back from teaching and learning as well.
Any board members have any further comments or questions? Okay. I think
That's all.
that's all. I think we're looking for a motion. I think Chair Huntsman wants to make it.
Oh, I'll be glad to. I was wondering if somebody else wanted to, unless somebody else had something to say. I'd like to make a motion to authorize the use of the carry forward balances as as shown and also in accordance with the section spend plans.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. I think that is everything. Do we need to discuss anything else?
Motion to adjourn unless there's any information requests or anything else.
Deputy?
Okay, since we have a lot of time here, no, I'm just kidding. Just please consider amongst the five of you that piece that I talked to you about where the board has money, in there, and it really would help us as your staff to align that properly with your objectives and all that too. So consider making that an agenda item at a future meeting. We could even do it at the next one if you like. Or if you have some other idea, if you want to do it in front of the whole board, or you just want us to keep it and update you monthly, we'll do that too, whatever you want. But I think that's a good best practice, is that if you at least tell us what you do it, because we can even break it down for you as the board tomorrow, because you're up tomorrow, your budget's up tomorrow. But I'm not sure if we could spend the time necessary to have you formulate a spend plan for your carry forward. Does that make sense? So we'll show you tomorrow what we've budgeted for you in your base budget, but then we need some additional help or assistance, guidance, direction from you for that remaining balance now.
I was just wondering what the timeline would be, like, when do we have to spend the money by?
You don't. It's non-lapsing. But what it does, though, is it's kind of like, well, you have this money out there, so do you not need it? Or,
Exactly.
and even if you want to take it and give it to another section, I'm sure they would take it. So, for whatever purpose or whatever. I mean, as long as it's unrestricted and all that stuff, too, we could do it for you, too. But, so I know, yeah. Well, Natalie's about to put me in a chokehold, so we'll do that, too.
Well, I just wanted to add the carryover balances as they have been reported to you have also been reported to the governor's office and to the legislative fiscal analyst's office. And we received an email request from them this week asking for the obligations and the information that we provided to you tonight for all of our carryover balances, federal and state. There are legislators that look at our carryover balances and seek to sweep or take those funds if they are not obligated or don't have spend plans. And so we will spend a substantial amount of time in the next week going through this. This was just the office budget. All of the other appropriations related to the minimum school program, our initiatives and contracts and grants are restricted. They're non-lapsing funds, so you don't have to approve them. The funds have to stay within the program and the purpose that they were appropriated for. But legislators are asking what those carryover balances are, why we have them, if they're obligated by contracts, why we haven't spent the money. It will take us a long time to provide that explanation to them. And so there is a substantial amount of transparency related to these carryover balances. And that's why it is so important that we're able to provide these spend plans and get them approved by the board, is to provide some justification to those who are requesting it as to what the uses of the funds for. They want to know if we're creating savings accounts or those kinds of accounts, if we're pigeonholing money, if you will. If the board designates or has priorities that are long-term, we report those and indicate, where we decided to save for a new building or something. We would designate that and report that as obligated funds so that they do not appear to be underutilized or misutilized. But we do receive requests probably from now until the last day of the session as to what all the carryover balances are used for and why we still need them. So.
And I think we can keep it a brief conversation tomorrow, but it'll be good to inform the board that there is X, and then also that probably the next month or so we'll put a strategy to somehow protect it or use it in a way that will best serve the board's needs. So it's transparency and openness. I think you will get that direction here in the next month or so. So I'm not too worried about it.
Cannon?
Well, I know that we've had federal mineral lease money for a long time, and you're telling me it's used for research and development. I'm just wondering if we could, Superintendent, do you know what some of the past projects that money has been used for?
Stand up. Yeah, so it's research, experimental, developmental. So, for example, when dual language immersion first started, there was a little bit of a match from the from the legislature, and then that supplemented the dual immersion program. So we have both in office from federal min release and then legislative money. Some literacy programs were funded out of that, arts programs initially. I know some of you in the audience might know better. My thinking cap is on pause. But it was those kind of programs that were initiatives that maybe schools and districts asked for or the board came up with, and it was a way for seed money. I think part of the challenge was that I personally experienced is that it became a permanent fund for many of these programs when it was intended to just provide seed money or pilot money to get them up and running, and then trying to shift to find a sustainable funding source. So I think when we dug into looking at how that pot was being diminished, as well as what it was being used for, and this was, even I think it kind of started a couple of superintendents back when we really started examining that fund, we could see the writing on the wall that it just had become sort of this permanent fund for some programs. And so we've made that shift very appropriately.
Okay.
Does that help?
And I understand that the fund has dropped precariously. Is that due to the price of oil? And
Yes.
I have Board Member Reevy.
I'd like to know how these numbers compare to numbers in the past. And I know that this year we've used some different budgeting tools, and we've also gone through some transitions. So I'm wondering, are these numbers similar to numbers in the past? And also, we've talked about some of our infrastructure concerns with data. And would any of this money be able to be used for making sure our data was more fluid?
So what we can do, we'd have to follow up with you on that. We'd have to take a comparison of what the carry forward balances were last year. How far do you want to go back?
I'm just wondering if it's a drastic difference or is it
Okay.
similar? I mean,
Okay.
just anecdotally. I'm not asking
It's very
for
similar.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 10,000 difference here, tens of thousands. I wouldn't say much above 100,000 differences anywhere, but probably in the tens of thousands.
I think you mentioned having it on the agenda next month to discuss some, priorities of what we could do. I think that would be fine. And I think one thing maybe to consider, I don't know how other board members feel about this, but we are required to have cell phones and access to technology and our job as state school board members. So possibly creating a small technology budget for state school board members, especially if you made your mobile phone number available to the public. Maybe we should pay for it. And I think that would be an appropriate use of some of that money. So that's one idea. Any other ideas to throw out there? No. Okay. I think that, Scott, anything further? Board Member Reevy?
Mine was IT infrastructure. And because in many of our different conversations, we were talking about how we are having struggles with keeping IT up to speed and data fluid.
Just an upgrade to the wireless in here would be used.
let's get people signed.
Yeah, Chair Huntsman.
And I'm also curious, I don't think we're really out of the woods yet on a lot of our operational practices, but for the last couple of years that I've been here, it's been interesting. We find ourselves in a little bit of a pickle, and we're like, okay, where are we going to find some money? And I'm not sure how we can, I'm not sure the best practice with the legislature and reporting, but it has been really healthy to have some contingencies someplace. And maybe moving forward, as we're dealing with some of this carry forward, I guess a question I have is once we approve this and it's all in motion, and circumstances come before us, and these sections haven't acted on some of these purposes that they have, can we still sweep it? Okay, I'm not saying hurry and go expand, but that contingency has rescued us on several situations. So I don't want to just go and spend it all and, okay, thank you. You want a motion to? Oh.
Motion.
Board Member Reeby.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye, votes unanimous. Thank you.
So we are starting right at 8 in the morning, right?
Yes.
Take a job. Thank you.